Welcome to this lecture on evolutionary biology. Today, we are going to explore a fascinating and fundamental concept known as genetic load. Have you ever wondered why evolution does not produce perfectly flawless organisms? Why do genetic diseases still exist despite millions of years of natural selection? The answer lies in the genetic baggage that populations carry over time. In this session, we will build our understanding of this concept from the ground up, look at the mathematics behind it, and see why it is so crucial for the survival of species. Let us dive in. To understand what genetic load is, let us start with a simple analogy. Imagine you are managing a massive factory that builds high-performance sports cars. In a perfect world, every single car that rolls off your assembly line would be absolutely flawless, running at peak efficiency. However, in reality, minor errors happen during manufacturing. Some cars might end up with slightly weaker engines or heavier frames. The factory still produces cars and makes a profit, but its overall efficiency is dragged down by these imperfect units. In evolutionary biology, a population of living organisms is just like this factory. The perfect car represents the best possible genetic makeup, and the drag caused by the imperfect cars is what we call genetic load. Before we formally define genetic load, we must first understand the biological concept of fitness. In evolutionary biology, fitness does not mean physical strength. Instead, it refers to an organism's ability to survive and reproduce in its specific environment. Because genetic mutations constantly occur, and because environments frequently change, no population is ever perfectly adapted to its surroundings. There will always be individuals carrying deleterious or harmful mutations that lower their chances of survival and reproduction. This constant state of genetic flux and environmental pressure is the foundation upon which genetic load is built. Without understanding fitness, we cannot measure the evolutionary burden a population carries. Now that we understand fitness, let us look at the formal biological definition of genetic load. Genetic load is defined as the reduction in the mean fitness of a population compared to a hypothetical population where every individual has the absolute best, most optimal genotype. The genetic load essentially measures this exact gap between the theoretical maximum fitness and the actual average fitness of the population. It is a quantitative way to express how much genetic baggage a population is carrying at any given time. Even with natural selection constantly at work, this gap always exists because new mutations continuously enter the gene pool. Understanding this gap between perfect and average fitness brings us to an important question. Why does genetic load matter? It is absolutely crucial because it explains why evolution does not produce perfectly flawless organisms. It helps biologists understand the limits of natural selection, as selection can only act on existing variations and can't instantly erase all harmful mutations. In the real world, this concept is heavily used in conservation biology to save endangered species. When a population shrinks, it tends to accumulate a high genetic load due to inbreeding, which can lead to a dangerous downward spiral called mutational meltdown. Furthermore, in human genetics, studying genetic load helps medical researchers understand why certain genetic diseases persist within our own populations today. Since we know why genetic load is important, let us look at how we actually measure it mathematically. We do this by comparing the fitness of the best possible genetic combination to the average fitness of everyone else in the population. The formula is L equals W max minus W bar, all divided by W max. Here, L represents the genetic load. The variable W max stands for the maximum possible fitness in the population, which is the fitness of the optimal genotype. The symbol W bar represents the mean or average fitness of the entire population. If the average fitness decreases because more harmful mutations accumulate, the genetic load L will increase. Conversely, if the population becomes highly adapted and the average fitness gets closer to the maximum fitness, the genetic load will shrink towards zero. Now that we have our formula, let us see this with a concrete example. Imagine a population of beetles with a specific gene controlling shell thickness. The beetles with the thickest shells have the highest survival rate, giving them a maximum fitness of 1.0. Field data shows the average fitness of the entire population is 0.85. We are asked to find the genetic load. We choose our standard formula because it compares these exact two values. We substitute 1.0 for W max and 0.85 for W bar. Subtracting these gives 0.15, and dividing by 1.0 leaves the value unchanged. The final answer is 0.15, or 15%. This means the beetle population experiences a 15% reduction in overall reproductive success compared to a perfectly adapted population. Having calculated a basic genetic load, we can now explore a slightly more advanced real-world application involving mutation rates. This brings us to a famous concept called Haldane's principle. Haldane's principle states that the genetic load caused by a recurrent harmful mutation depends only on the mutation rate, not on how harmful the mutation actually is. This is a profound theoretical result. It means that even if a mutation is only slightly harmful, it will persist much longer in the population because natural selection does not weed it out immediately. Ultimately, it causes the exact same total reduction in fitness over time as a highly lethal mutation that is quickly removed by natural selection. This profound idea from Haldane leads us to a very simple but powerful mathematical representation. For a dominant deleterious mutation, the genetic load at equilibrium is exactly equal to the mutation rate. The formula is simply L equals mu. Here, L is the genetic load and mu is the mutation rate. Notice what is missing from this equation. The severity of the mutation does not appear at all. This absence is Haldane's principle in action. If the mutation rate mu increases, the genetic load increases proportionally, regardless of whether the mutation causes a mild defect or a severe disease. This elegant formula allows us to predict the evolutionary burden simply by knowing how often a new mutation arises. With this new formula in hand, let us apply it to a population of fruit flies. Suppose a dominant harmful mutation occurs in this population at a steady rate of 0.0002 mutations per generation. We want to find the mutational genetic load at equilibrium. Because we are dealing with a recurrent dominant mutation, we choose the simplified formula derived from Haldane's principle, where load equals the mutation rate. We simply substitute the given mutation rate directly into the equation. The final answer is 0.0002, or 0.02%. Physically, this tells us that the continuous introduction of this specific mutation reduces the population's overall fitness by 0.02% every single generation. Now that we have calculated genetic load in two different ways, let us visualize exactly what these numbers represent. Look at the graph on your screen. The horizontal axis represents the different genotypes present in a population, while the vertical axis represents their fitness. The large bell curve shows the distribution of these genotypes. At the very peak of the curve, we have a dashed line representing the maximum possible fitness, or W max. This is our perfect, flawless organism. However, the solid line lower down represents the actual mean fitness of the population, or W bar. The bold downward arrow connecting the maximum fitness to the mean fitness is the genetic load. It visually represents the evolutionary burden, showing exactly how far the population falls short of absolute perfection due to imperfect genetic variation. As we wrap up this topic, let us review the most important ideas we have covered. First, genetic load is a fundamental concept that quantifies the evolutionary burden carried by a population due to imperfect genetic variation. It bridges the gap between the theoretical ideal of natural selection and the messy, mutation-filled reality of biological life. Second, we learned how to measure this gap by comparing maximum possible fitness to actual average fitness. Third, through Haldane's principle, we discovered that the burden of recurrent mutations depends entirely on the mutation rate, regardless of how harmful the mutation is. Ultimately, genetic load reminds us that evolution is not about achieving absolute perfection. It is about being just good enough to survive and reproduce in a changing world. You now have a solid understanding of genetic load.